Ever wish you could run your business or organization, with maybe a little less red tape, a lot more freedom?
Hmm.
Well, we're going to take a deep dive today into something called a UNA. It stands for Unincorporated Nonprofit Association, and it just might be the ticket.
Yeah, think of it kind of like a streamlined approach. It comes with some surprising perks like cost efficiency, flexibility, and even maybe some potential tax advantages. You might even recognize this term billionaires tax loophole. It's been used to describe it.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, but we'll get into, all the nuances of that a little bit later. But first, what exactly is a UNA? I'll let our expert take this one.
Okay, so a UNA is unique because, as the name suggests, it's unincorporated. That means it isn't viewed as a separate legal entity, like a traditional corporation or an LLC.
Okay.
And the nonprofit side of things, well, that means its main purpose isn't generating profit, but rather serving a specific purpose. You often see this structure with clubs, community groups, or even some professional associations. So it's less about the structure of, typical business and more about facilitating a specific goal.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what are some of the upsides to organizing things this way?
Well, the beauty of a UNA really lies in its simplicity. You can actually start one with just one person, and it only needs one member to get going.
Wow.
This means less paperwork, fewer hoops to jump through, and naturally, that translates to lower costs compared to setting up a more traditional incorporated entity. It can be particularly appealing for those, working with more limited resources.
Less hassle and lower startup costs. That definitely sounds appealing. But what about day-to-day operations? Does a UNA offer more flexibility there as well?
Absolutely. With the UNA, you have the power to set your own rules, you determine how things run. You aren't as bound by the typical corporate laws, which can be a huge advantage for those wanting to align their operations with their specific mission and values.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned potential tax advantages earlier. Can you shed some light on those? Is the Billionaires Tax Loophole nickname accurate?
While it's certainly not like a guaranteed loophole, there is some truth to it. Depending on your jurisdiction and the specific purpose of your UNA, you might be eligible for certain tax exemptions.
Okay.
It's important to note that these are often tied to educational or charitable activities. For instance, a UNA focused on providing, let's say, free educational workshops to the community might qualify for certain exemptions that a for-profit business wouldn't. Plus, the IRS will issue a TID, a taxpayer identification number, for your UNA, giving it a degree of legitimacy.
So there is a potential for tax benefits, especially if your UNA is focused on, serving the community in a certain way. This is making UNA sound pretty attractive. Are there any potential downsides we should be aware of?
Well, there are always two sides to every coin, right?
Um,
One potential drawback is that UNAs often have limited access to capital markets. Because they aren't incorporated, they may not be as appealing to traditional investors or lenders, which can make securing large loans challenging.
That's a good point. If you're looking for large-scale investments, a UNA may not be the right fit. What about liability? Is there anything to be cautious about there?
This is another crucial aspect to consider. In some jurisdictions, members of a UNA could be held personally liable for the organization's debts or obligations. This varies from place to place, but it's essential to research the specific regulations in your location and understand the potential risks involved.
So greater freedom sometimes comes with greater responsibility. It sounds like careful research and planning are key when deciding if a UNA is the right path. Before we move on, is there anything else we should keep in mind when it comes to the possible downsides of a UNA?
Yes, establishing credibility can sometimes be a hurdle for UNAs compared to more established incorporated entities. This is particularly relevant when dealing with larger organizations or businesses that are accustomed to working with traditional corporate structures.
Yeah, it's like the old saying, sometimes you need to spend money to make money. If having a more readily recognizable structure is important, a UNA might not be the best fit. What about specific locations? Are there areas where UNAs are particularly advantageous or disadvantageous?
Interestingly, California has emerged as a surprisingly favorable state for setting up UNAs. They have specific regulations that make this structure potentially advantageous, especially for those who don't require access to large amounts of capital. This makes California a good option for, let's say, individuals or smaller groups getting started.
So even though we've been talking about potential downsides, there are definitely places, like California, where a UNA structure could be a great option. Before we dive into some real-world examples, what are some key considerations people should keep in mind when determining if a UNA is right for them?
I think the most important thing is to get like crystal clear about your goals and values. What are you hoping to achieve with this organization? What principles are non-negotiable? Once you have a solid understanding of your why, you can start to see if the UNA structure aligns with that vision.
That makes sense. It's making sure the foundation is strong before you start building. What are some of the questions people should be asking themselves during this process?
Well, consider your need for outside funding. Are you planning to, bootstrap this venture, or are you seeking large-scale investments? If it's the latter, a UNA might not be the most suitable option, given the potential challenges with accessing capital markets.
So knowing how you're going to fund the project from the start is essential. What about the legal and operational aspects? What should people be thinking about there?
Research the specific regulations in your state or jurisdiction. Remember, some places like California might have a more favorable environment for UNAs than others. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of consulting with, legal and financial professionals. They can help you navigate the intricacies of setting up and running a UNA, ensuring you're, dotting all your I's and crossing your T's.
It's like having a seasoned guide when you're exploring uncharted territory. They can help you avoid the pitfalls and make the most of the unique advantages a UNA offers. Now, you mentioned real-world examples earlier. Are there any specific cases where UNAs have been used successfully?
Oh, there's a fascinating case study of a group of independent artists. They formed a UNA to manage a shared studio space and gallery. They were drawn to the UNA structure because it gave them the flexibility to set their own membership rules, manage their finances transparently amongst themselves, and even distribute any profits from gallery sales in a way that aligned with their values. They also appreciated the lower overhead costs compared to renting individual studio spaces, which allowed them to invest more in community outreach programs. This example showcases how UNAs can foster a sense of community and shared purpose while also providing, practical benefits.
That's a great example. It highlights how a UNA can empower a group with a shared vision to achieve their goals collectively. Are there any examples that demonstrate the potential tax benefits we were discussing earlier?
Absolutely. There's a compelling example of a UNA dedicated to providing free coding classes to underprivileged youth. By structuring themselves as a nonprofit, they qualified for specific tax exemptions related to educational activities. These exemptions allowed them to allocate more of their resources to expanding their programs and reaching a wider audience.
Those are some great examples of how UNAs can be utilized in different ways to achieve specific goals. It's clear that this structure offers a unique blend of freedom and purpose. Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on something we briefly mentioned earlier, the Billionaires Tax Loophole nickname. Can you shed some light on why this term emerged and address its validity?
Sure. So the Billionaires Tax Loophole moniker arose because some high net worth individuals have explored using UNAs as part of their larger financial strategies. The idea was that by placing assets within a UNA dedicated to a specific cause, they could potentially shield those assets from certain taxes while also supporting, charitable endeavors. However, it's crucial to understand that the IRS scrutinizes these types of arrangements very closely, and using a UNA solely for tax avoidance purposes is highly discouraged and can have serious legal consequences. The validity of this loophole is debatable and highly situation dependent.
So while the term itself might be catchy, it's important to approach it with a healthy dose of skepticism and seek expert guidance to ensure compliance with all applicable tax regulations.
Exactly. It's essential to remember that UNAs, at their core, are designed to facilitate community-oriented goals and shouldn't be viewed as a primary tool for tax avoidance.
That's a crucial point to emphasize. Now, as we start to wrap up our deep dive into the world of UNAs, I'm curious to hear your personal take. What do you find most compelling about this structure?
For me, it's the potential for UNAs to cultivate a sense of shared ownership and responsibility among members. Because they're often member-driven, they create a space where everyone has a voice and a stake in the organization's success. It's like harnessing the power of collective action for a common goal.
It sounds like UNAs offer a unique approach to balancing individual autonomy with collective decision-making. That's a fascinating concept. Now, for our listeners who might be considering a UNA, what are some essential takeaways they should keep in mind?
I'd say remember that setting up a UNA requires careful consideration and research. Don't jump in blindly. Understand your goals, your values, and your financial situation. Explore the legal landscape in your jurisdiction. And most importantly, seek guidance from qualified professionals who can provide tailored advice based on your specific needs.
Solid advice. Don't underestimate the power of doing your homework and having the right people on your side. Now, before we sign off, is there a final thought-provoking question you'd like to leave our listeners with? Something for them to ponder as they continue their exploration of UNAs.
Absolutely. When considering a UNA, ask yourself this. In pursuing your goals, is it more important to have complete freedom or the security of like a well-established structure? Is there a way to strike a balance between the two?
That's a great question to consider. It really gets to the heart of what we've been discussing. It seems like finding that sweet spot between autonomy and structure is key.
Precisely. And the beauty of the UNA is that it challenges us to rethink traditional organizational structures. It prompts us to consider how we can achieve our goals while operating with greater flexibility and purpose.
Yeah, it's almost like a shift in mindset. Maybe success isn't just about reaching a specific destination, but also about choosing a path that aligns with your values.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And perhaps the UNA, with its unique blend of freedom and purpose, can inspire us to find more innovative and fulfilling ways to achieve our goals.
It's exciting to think about the possibilities. If UNAs become more prevalent, it could really shake up the traditional ways of doing business.
I agree. It's an area ripe for innovation, and I'm eager to see how it evolves. Who knows? Maybe the UNA is just the beginning of a whole new wave of organizational structures that prioritize both individual freedom and collective purpose.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive into the world of UNAs, I want to thank you for sharing your expertise and insights. It's been a fascinating conversation.
It's been my pleasure. I always enjoy exploring these unconventional paths and considering how they might shape the future.
And to our listeners, if you're feeling inspired by the possibilities of a UNA, I encourage you to continue your research, reach out to experts, and most importantly, trust your gut.
And remember, the journey of building something meaningful is rarely a straight line. Embrace the challenges, stay curious, and don't be afraid to explore those less traveled paths. You never know what you might discover.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of UNAs. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep building.